That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Harvest, the third film directed by Athena Rachel Tsangari, which just premiered at the 2024 Venice Film Festival, where it was in competition. And you have just seen it after its North American premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival.
That's right. And you had seen it in Venice.
Yes.
I know you're probably familiar with this director.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's the only female member of the Greek Weird Wave, thanks to her 2010 debut, Attenberg, which I think is still her best film. She's been around a while, though, because she starred or was featured in a couple of Richard Linklater's, well, at least in his first film, Slacker, I believe, which also explains why she pops up in his Before Midnight film as well. And then in 2015, she directed a film called Chevalier, which concerns six men on a ship. And this is her latest feature.
What is Harvest about? I saw several summaries, but I like this one the best. Over 7 hallucinatory days, a village with no name in an unidentified time and place disappears. What's your pull quote?
Although it's well shot and features the ever-arresting Caleb Landry Jones, Tsangari can't get away from the sense of theatrical pantomime in this snoozy allegorical exercise, which promises folk horror but delivers boredom.
So this is going to be interesting because you didn't like the film, and I think I loved it.
Yeah, I actually, it was, I think, the first film I saw during Venice where I felt kind of repelled.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, my pull quote. Playing like a mix of Midsummer and The Village, Harvest succeeds as a uniquely immersive allegory for modernization and gentrification. I had read your Ion Cinema review, and your thoughts are similar to a lot of other people's I read, so I'm not surprised. I felt very connected to the story for some reason. I think it felt like growing up in LA and seeing how it's changed and being a homeowner now and sort of participating in gentrification, but also finding myself complaining about unhoused people at times. And it all felt very relevant to me. What you said about it, I read a lot of other people say the same thing. I don't know that I needed it to come to this big crescendo because it felt very matter of fact, like that's how the cookie crumbles. Once we get into the story, it's like, that's kind of how things work. It's never this big dramatic, so, but I could definitely see people thinking it's kind of a snooze fest. And
Well, I don't have a problem with it not coming to a grand crescendo. I think the finale is appropriate. It's just it takes so long to get there, and it's so drawn out. And to me, I thought kind of obvious that I just, and I didn't like any of these characters, especially, I like Caleb Landry Jones, but between he and Harry Melling, like these two men that are very, that are kind of without a backbone, I just lost interest in it very quickly.
I totally understand that. I think that I felt like them being spineless kind of felt like again, that's just how it goes. Like, imagine a bank telling you they're going to take your home you have no power. Like, what could either character have done? But let's get into the story. So, it said the premise said a village with no name in an unidentified time and place, but it would seem like it's in the Middle Ages and it's somewhere in the countryside of England or something. They're by a body of water, so there's that. But anyway, so Master Kent is played by
Harry Melling.
And he owns this huge plot of land that has a master house and then cottages where they farm the land. And he has people working for him, but they've become a community of people. And they sort of have an understanding that these villagers, it's as much their land as it is his. But the gag is really, it's not. It's his property. He just lets them live there. But there's another gag that sends it, I think adds to the complexity that I found very interesting. But the star of the film is Caleb Landry Jones because he's part of this village, but he's also close friends with Master Kent. They're not on equal playing field, though. The reason that those two are friends is because Caleb's mother was Master Kent's wet nurse. So he spent a lot of time in the like with him and they grew close. But then when they got older, Caleb met a woman who lived on this like in this village, fell in love with her and decided to live in the village with her. So now their relationship has changed because Caleb kind of like is a service person to Master Kent. But like you already mentioned, they're both kind of spineless. So Master Kent's not like this monster of a, he's not like a slave master. He's just this meek guy who kind of lets the villagers do whatever they want. And he's just kind of like the figure of the land.
He's kind of like that middle manager that's not really in control, but that you have to report to, but really can't do much for you.
That's right. So the 7 days. So what propels the story forward is that one day, three strangers show up. They're like nomads. And the villagers think that they are responsible for a fire that occurred at the beginning of the movie. And no one wants to explain what happened. So they see these three people who I thought represented like unhoused people because they're kind of squatting on the land. And these villagers like form a mob, grab these three people, and then they have a pillory, which is like, it's kind of like Jesus on the cross, except your head and hands are through like holes.
Yeah, like medieval punishment.
I'll put a picture up. Anyway, they put the two men up there, but then there's one woman, this very beautiful brown woman with very beautiful long curly hair. And they cut all her hair off and just let her go. And I'm going to ask you what you think that meant a little later. So the bulk of the story is these two men in the pillory just talking shit the entire movie, which I thought was very funny. Then you have Master Kent, who has like this like celebratory dinner at a point and says, "Oh, I've been thinking like we're such a great community and you all do such a great job with your harvesting." And they also like sew baskets and make sweaters and things, scarves. And he says, "Well, I think that maybe you all should make them so we can sell them." But then some of the people in the village think that he's just trying to use them, which I find interesting because like you're kind of using him because he's just letting you live on his land and eat up all his food. So there's that tension. But then the real gag is that we find out, and we know this is coming because Master Kent brings on a character named Mr. Earl, who I kind of recognized.
Arinze Kenne, who they also call Quill, he's the cartographer.
Yeah, he makes maps. So, of course, you can predict that why would he be making a map of his land? Because they're going to either sell it or use it for something else. And we find out that Master Kent, so he had a wife and so did Caleb. Both of their spouses died, but the land belonged to Master Kent's wife. So he assumed it, but I guess the law of the land says that in this instance, the spouse does not get the land, like actual family gets it. So all of a sudden, this gay cousin pops up and he's like, "Yeah, girl, this is my land. And the way you run it is so inefficient. I'm a businessman. We need to cut the overhead, ramp up these profits. So we're going to get rid of all the villagers. We're going to plow everything, get rid of all the trees because you can't grow shit in the shade. And we're going to make some money." So, of course, the villagers are upset. And then all of a sudden, Master Kent's beloved horse Willowjack is murdered. So the gay cousin is like, "Well, since you never found out who set your damn cottage on fire, and clearly it's probably the same person who killed your horse, we're going to figure out who did it." Which should be pretty easy because horses have a lot of blood in their body, and that horse died from being stabbed in the head. So whomever stabbed the horse should be covered in blood. And ain't no washing machines around here, so all we have to do is find the bloody garment, and we know who did it. So that's a whole portion of the film where they end up taking three of the villagers, including a little girl. She points the finger at the map maker. It's a big mess.
And it's at this point where Walter Thirsk, who's Caleb Landry Jones, is kind of forced to assist. His name is Master Jordan, played by Frank Delane.
The gay cousin.
Do you think he's gay because he seemed prissy?
Yeah.
You know, what's funny is I commented that he reminded me of like a young Vincent Price.
Oh, well, see, then we're both.
Yeah, like this terrible person, like in Witchfinder General. Yeah.
So, like you just said, Caleb, now the villagers have turned their back on Caleb because he's helping the gay cousin. But another reason they don't like him is because all of the other villagers were like born and like raised on that village. But Caleb showed up later in life. He didn't grow up there. So they allowed him to join. So now they feel betrayed by him. But ultimately, the villagers realize the jig is up. Like there's no staying here, so we might as well leave. So everyone leaves except Caleb. And the gay cousin goes, good. Well, now you're in charge because we're all going to leave. And in a few days' time, I'm going to have some people come by to start preparing the land to make it a profitable farm. And you can just be like the manager. And Caleb says, okay, give me the keys. He immediately releases one of the prisoners because the other prisoner died from pigs biting at his leg.
Well, he was shorter too, so I think he might maybe
He
suffocation.
probably got strangled too because he couldn't touch the floor. But either way, Caleb lets that man go. He gets high on mushrooms, lights the village on fire. And then earlier in the film, we saw that there's this big boundary stone, they call it, where when all the kids reach a certain age, they get taken to the stone and they get their heads smashed in so that they know that they can never leave that area. So the end of the film is Caleb, after he has set the village on fire and he's high as a kite, he goes and smashes his head into the stone, the end. So we don't know if he intended to kill himself or not.
Lived or died, or if that was as that ritual is, and he was a latecomer to this community, maybe that is his putting his stamp on. Now he also really
Or
belongs.
that, yeah. I wanted to start by saying I really liked the cinematography.
Same. Sean Price Williams, who I think if you haven't seen his work on the Safdie brothers film Good Time, highly recommended. Yeah,
We reviewed a film maybe like a year and a half ago, and it felt experimental, and it was on like a Scottish Isle, and it was like a lady, and like she kept going back and forth. Do you know what I'm talking about?
yes, that which was that's more classified as a folk horror film. Mhm.
It kind of had that vibe with the cinematography. I thought it was beautiful, and then there was like an element to the film where like the borders, like the border of the screen had like an effect to it. But I thought the way the countryside and the water was shot was really beautiful. I also thought the sound editing was really good because there's a big focus, especially in the beginning of the film, on nature and specifically how connected to the land Caleb Landry Jones' character is. And so, particularly in the opening, we almost get like this erotic scene with Caleb, like almost like sexually assaulting like a tree trunk because he's like kind of kissing some moss and eating moss off of a tree trunk and then like tonguing a hole in a tree, and then he strips down naked and goes swimming after kind of like undulating for a minute.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a sexy. He has more erotic sex with nature than the love interest in the film, played by Rosie McEwen,
That's right.
Kitty Goss. The film that you were mentioning that was the folk horror was Ennis Main.
Yes, that's right. But getting back to the sound editing, we also get several moments throughout the film where we see insects,
Mhm.
and like the sound editing of like the insects I thought was very effective because I think it's also showing like the layers of like who does this land really belong to? Because you could argue it's those bugs we're seeing. It's really their land. But okay, I'm just going to go through my notes. The opening, Caleb Landry Jones is an interesting person.
Yes, remember we saw him at the Grove.
Yeah, the farmer's market, just casually walking around. And he was at this screening that I saw. It was very awkward, but cute. But yeah, he has a very interesting look. And we see him get naked. And I thought, oh, he has a nice butt, but his fingernails are so nasty. And then it made me think, I bet you his ass is nasty. But then you already mentioned his love interest, who's a pretty like nice looking lady.
Rosie, yeah, she's pretty.
And that poor thing must be real desperate because she is like really wanting a piece of him. Not to shade Caleb Landry Jones, but that character feels real grimy to me.
she's also a widow. So and it seems because we see them like in a lovemaking sequence, that it's almost perfunctory. Like it's just something that they're have that as we come to find, he probably has more of an emotional allegiance to Master Kent than he does her.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I know you had already seen it, but as I was watching it, I was 100% sure that Master Kent was maybe like in love with Caleb.
Again, but not enough to set his own interests aside. But
Sure.
there's that one scene, I think they're like reveling and drinking, and he kind of touches Caleb's arm and says, like, "Oh, it's too bad our wives aren't here," or something.
Well, I thought he did that because he saw him canoodling with the other lady.
He did, but yeah, but it because of all those visual cues, it sets up this kind of
Oh,
strange,
yes. Yeah.
jealous tension. Yeah.
I agree. I thought that he was probably jealous. Also, towards the beginning of the final act, I think, um, Master Kent initiates like some roughhousing, the
Yeah.
kind adolescent boys do that's a little like experimental. So I was up until the end, I thought, I wonder if there was maybe something there. That I mean, I will say, as much as I enjoyed this film, it did feel maybe like 20 minutes too long. So I don't want to say I wish they would have expounded on the story, but maybe if they would have used some of that 20 minutes to elaborate on Caleb and Master Kent's relationship.
It made you wonder what was holding up the ceiling.
Okay. Speaking of dirty fingernails, Caleb's character gets his hand burned when he's trying to put out the cottage fire in the beginning. And so at a point, he's making like he's mixing eggs with flour and salt. And then
Mhm.
his little girlfriend goes, "Oh, let me help you with that." And she takes that old salmonella dough and like uses it to like heal his hand.
Yeah, to pack the wounds. Yeah, I've seen that in other films too,
Oh,
where
have you? Okay.
they use uh, random bits of nature to shove in there.
That was a bit much for me. Okay, so there's a lot of symbolism because I think there's like the land and our connection to it, and how can any of us really own the land? And then some of the villagers at one point say like, "This is ours." Like, but then also the strangers, like the nomadic people, they also say, "Well, we have rights too because we set up like a tent," which made me think of like being a homeowner in Los Angeles and being told that there's nothing we can do about people sleeping in front of your house or blocking. And people don't just block the sidewalk; they block like an entire block.
Yes.
So, like I think it was really speaking to me in that regard. But I think the symbolism of the different layers and then showing the insects burrowing into the land, like, well, who does it really belong to? Because even the person who y'all thought owned it doesn't own it.
Right.
Like someone else came and took the shit. So I found that to be very, especially thinking about how I feel like so many stories don't have anything to say. Like so many movies we review have nothing to say. This one did speak to me a lot.
There again, there is a lot of very clever things in the subtext, and keep in mind it's based on a novel written by Jim Crace, if I'm saying that name right. And I'd imagine I probably would have liked reading the novel more than spending so long with these visual representations of them. But I think it's also important to note that the nomadic trio is the kind of metaphorically, they're the ghosts of Christmas future for this small town.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, because as we learn from the cartographer, which again is another layered metaphor of this man that's drawing, we're putting these man-made boundaries over nature, like for what? And is told by Master Jordan at one point to redraw the map because he's going to be raising the area. And that's exactly what happened to the next town over where these people were from.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I mean, there's so much built into that with the mapping itself because the gay cousin says, "I need a map that's like a grid."
Mhm.
And then the map maker, Mr. Earl, goes, "Oh, you mean without people, like erase the people." And
Mhm.
he's like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I need." But then I think the best scene in the film, because Mr. Earl, the map maker, has employed essentially Caleb Landry Jones' character to help him, mainly because Caleb has an injured hand, so he can't really plow the land. So this is like his um like the work he can handle. So he's helping him with his maps. And so at the end, when like the final scene where they're making the maps, Mr. Earl wants to share a different map with Caleb, and he looks at it and he says, you know, your map, I think the line he says is, your map flattens us. And I thought
Mhm.
that was so powerful because basically he's saying that all it's really showing is like the area and like landmarks. But then Caleb tells a story of like, well, this area here has a steep hill. And every day when I walk it, it feels like this. And this area is a little more difficult. And I always enjoy, like, he's giving context to the map that the map itself cannot give.
Mhm.
And that really spoke to me about what
Yeah.
home like what home means and like gentrification, how whatever ends up however this land ends up being used by the gay cousin couldn't be more meaningful than what it meant to the people who were there. But such is life, right? Like,
Notably, the cartographer, Arinze Kenne, he did the voice of the Death as played by a big parrot in that film Tuesday with Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
oh, and I like that movie too. I want to talk about the brown lady whose hair gets cut off. Why do you think they did that?
Well, one, there's only two spaces, as you said, in the pillory, but they're, I think that they are taking away what means something. They're taking away from the men, in my opinion, their freedom of move, like that, they're the top of the hierarchy. Men are the most free, and all of a woman is in this time and place, wherever it is, I would assume is not free. So the next best thing that to punish her with is to take away, to mar her beauty. Um, because Rosie McEwen is the one, Kitty Goss is the one that shears her basically, and all the women are mumbling about how all the men still find this woman attractive. But I think that was their way of that's the way they could hurt her most because she's still tethered to the men. She's still running around in the woods. Like she's not free.
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was deliberate that they made not only the map maker a person of color, but also this woman who's exceedingly beautiful. And the women, even because the main lady, Caleb's little girlfriend, because the women are kind of talking shit about her, and she's like, that, like, we shouldn't have done what we did. We were in a frenzy. We don't even know why we did that. That lady didn't do anything to us to deserve that. And while y'all hating on her, all these men think she, like you said, they're attracted to her. Because I thought a really upsetting scene, as a person who has the same kind of hair this lady did, is when they cut it off. First, the kids go and grab it, like it's like this novelty, like this strange thing. They've never seen this kind of hair. And then the men go grab it. And it's like, what do these grown-ass men want with this woman's hair? And you see one of them play with it, like make a mustache, but it felt very like, I mean, like they're fetishizing this lady. And I think maybe to set it to modern representations, people being threatened
Mhm.
by
It,
things that are different and maybe things that they perceive as better.
it's disrespectful on several levels, yes.
Yeah. I want to talk about urine because we see towards the beginning that Caleb, at a point, feels stressed out. And so he goes outside and pees like in the dirt and then makes mud out of it and then grabs it and is holding it like he can't feel more connected to something than what he just did. And then we visit urine again because the map maker ends up being killed. And the way he's killed is the brown lady catches up to his ass and she basically like strangles him or drowns him by sitting on his face and urinating on his face. And
I
people
thought
in the audience were groaning.
I thought she did that to Caleb Landry Jones, but I guess it was the map maker. But yeah, and I would have been fine with the film ending right there at that moment. And it also reminded me of Kathleen Turner in War of the Roses.
Oh, I need to rewatch that movie. Something powerful is that during the party where Master Kent tells them, "Hey, we should start selling all your stuff," they're all drunk and they're doing these really like, I mean, it's almost like pagan. It looks like a pagan ritual, like what's
Mhm.
happening. And then at one point, narration tells us like we're all just drunk and lecherous. So I thought that was a very interesting choice because these villagers are not like these innocent, peaceful people, right? Like they, one could argue, mistreated these strangers. They did not welcome them for no good reason, blamed them for something that several people in the village know they are not responsible for, meaning the cottage fire. And then
Including Caleb Landry Jones.
right. I don't know if we mentioned that, but it would seem that Caleb Landry Jones knows who set the fire because he says in the beginning, I should have raised my hand and said something, but I figured I shouldn't. And I assumed that to be that because later we learned that he's a visitor, so maybe he didn't want to stir the
Mhm.
pot. But yeah, the fact that these people are aware that they're like a mess, but then still feel like they have it just feels very like I see so much in my current life with people around me, and it's like it's very similar attitudes of what they think they deserve and how other
Sure.
people owe them things. And
And you're speaking about it with a great reverence, which I appreciate, and I like all those subtexts about it. But anytime something physical was happening, this felt like pantomime with me. It like because there's a bunch of scuffling and fighting and some violence, and it all just felt so fake. To the point where I'm like, because I haven't read the novel, I'm like, is this going to be like The Village, where we learn that this is modern times and these people are doing almost, like these fools that are doing Civil War reenactments because it just felt so inauthentic to me or
I'm
unauthentic.
glad you brought that up because my pull quote, that is why it felt like The Village to me, that for the first like 30, 40 minutes, it felt like this is an experiment. And then
Mhm.
because we're not really made clear of like a time and place, I thought like, oh, and then because of the way they handle the strangers, I thought maybe this is a fake environment. But then I don't not agree with what you're saying. I guess I'm taking it as being a deliberate choice to show that like this isn't their whole like everything feels so flimsy, like you're just kind of here on like a handshake. And then that handshake is flimsy because the person who shook your hand doesn't own the shit either. But then, so that's the village vibes. And then, like the boundary stone where the kids are made to fear going beyond a certain point. And then the midsummer vibes are kind of the rituals, the fact that they're in like this countryside, the hallucinogenics, the cinematography. Um, I and then they have this moment where they have the Gleaning Queen, which reminded me of Midsummer, because I think they have the harvest or the what do they
Yes,
call it?
the May Queen.
The May Queen, yeah. So this one they have the Gleaning Queen, and they
Yeah.
let the map maker select the Gleaning Queen.
Well, it's kind of funny because he selects this little girl, and there's all these women that are clearly dolled up to have been
Yeah,
selected potentially, and they look mad.
they're real. Well, they we know they're mad because they say they're mad later. Like, why they let that stranger choose? Um, I thought it was funny that like how everyone has allergies nowadays, but in this movie, like all the like they use pollen as makeup,
Oh
and then
yeah.
they're cleaning like this hay, and it's just like particles everywhere. There's not
Well,
enough Allegra to,
you could say we have the privilege of being more fragile.
yes.
But and the thing with the boundary the remapping that's happening, it reminded me of that Leonard Cohen song, "Hey, that's no way to say goodbye," because there's a line in it that's just the way it changes, like the shoreline of the sea. Like
Mm.
we're basically just eroding and remapping all the time.
You know, there's a really interesting scene where Caleb is showing the map maker around and explaining to him some things, and then he gets emotional sharing his story. I believe that's when he tells the map maker about how his wife died from a bee sting. And then Caleb sort of like shuts down and he's telling the map maker, you need to slap me. Like slap me. And the map maker is hesitant, slaps him lightly. And Caleb is like, no, harder, harder. And he slaps him like 5 times. And then finally he slaps the shit out of him. And then all of a sudden Caleb like resets and comes back to reality. I thought that was very interesting. Um, one more time mentioning the gay cousin. Master Kent, his clothing is very interesting. It almost looks like he's wearing his dead wife's clothes. And then when his cousin sees him, he's like, "What the hell are you wearing?"
He might be. That just yeah.
Um, but yeah, we don't agree on a score, I'm sure, but I see your points. It
I
just felt personal, and I was tired when I watched it, and somehow it still had an effect. So I trust my instinct, I guess.
I was exhausted after I watched this, and I had to immediately walk into it after watching Queer in Venice, which is a much longer even than this, but I enjoyed more. But I just think maybe I have such high expectations based on Singari's past two films, and also an overdependence on narration, which kind of drives me crazy. That I think there was a way that she could have had all of that intact and also made it interesting, because I think it has woeful pacing issues.
Well, I definitely agree that the ending feels like it starts and stops several times, and it could have just ended where you said it should have. But what would you give Harvest?
In my written review, I gave it a 2, and I maintain that score.
2 out of 5. I'm giving it 4 out of 5. But
Okay,
you know
well,
what? The director was also at the screening I was at, and so was Master Kent. And the three of them, it would seem, had already read some negative reviews because they commented about it and said, like, we hope that you like our film more than other people did. So, not that that makes me feel like I should like it, but
no,
I
everybody should have their own opinion. And again, even listening to you speak about it makes me want to like it more, but I just don't.
join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.